courage,
fortitudo,
wisdom,
prudentia,
temperance,
temperantia,
justice.
justitia.
Exploring ancient philosophy for the path to the good life. This is the Sunday Stoic.
I'm Steve, and this is episode 4 of the Sunday Stoic. We will focus on the Stoic virtue of justice. Treating your fellow humans with humanity, respect, and equanimity. Something that we might fail at more frequently than we would care to admit to ourselves. This is why it's important to have sort of a running Stoic commentary in your mind. Ask yourself, am I doing right in this situation? Am I doing the wise thing? Am I using my knowledge of wisdom in this situation? Am I being just in this situation? Am I being kind to the cashier at the grocery store? Am I tipping the waitress the amount that they are owed based on their service, or am I being cheap? Am I treating the homeless person on the street with due justice as if they are my brother, or am I ignoring them and hoping they'll go away? These are the sorts of things you have to wrestle with when you are implementing a life philosophy. So we will hear from the three amigos of Stoicism today, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus. And one thing you might find a little unusual or even a little uncomfortable is their discussion of slaves. It was common at the time for well-to-do Romans to have slaves, and so they discuss the treatment of slaves in their discussions of justice. So let's see what they have to say about the Stoic virtue of justice. And as usual, you can follow along with the readings. You can find a link to them at the website, sundaystoic.wordpress.com, and feel free to shoot me an email at sundaystoic@gmail.com.
Epictetus, the Enchiridion, number 43. Everything has two handles, one by which it may be borne, another by which it cannot. If your brother acts unjustly, do not lay hold on the affair by the handle of his injustice, for by that it cannot be borne, but rather by the opposite, that he is your brother, that he was brought up with you, and thus you will lay hold on it as it is to be borne.
The Thoughts of Marcus Aurelius, Chapter 5, Verse 31. How hast thou behaved hitherto to the gods, thy parents, brethren, children, teachers, to those who looked after thy infancy, to thy friends, kinsfolk, to thy slaves? Consider if thou hast hitherto behaved to all in such a way that this may be said of thee, never has wronged a man in deed or word. And call to recollection how many things thou hast passed through, and how many things thou hast been able to endure, and that the history of thy life is now complete, and thy service is ended, and how many beautiful things thou hast seen, and how many pleasures and pains thou hast despised, and how many things called honorable thou hast spurned, and how many ill-minded folks thou hast shown a kind disposition. Moral Letters to Lucilius by Seneca, Letter 47. I am glad to learn, through those who come from you, that you live on friendly terms with your slaves. This befits a sensible and well-educated man like yourself. They are slaves, people declare. Nay, rather, they are men. Slaves? No. Comrades? Slaves? No. They are unpretentious friends. Slaves? No. They are our fellow slaves, if one reflects that fortune has equal rights over slaves and freemen alike. That is why I smile at those who think it degrading for a man to dine with his slave. But why should they think it degrading? It is only because purse-proud etiquette surrounds a householder at his dinner with a mob of standing slaves. The master eats more than he can hold, and with monstrous greed loads his belly until it is stretched at length, ceases to do the work of a belly, so that he is at greater pains to discharge all the food than he was to stuff it down. All this time the poor slaves may not move their lips even to speak. The slightest murmur is repressed by the rod. Even a chance sound, a cough, a sneeze, or a hiccup, is visited with the lash. There is a grievous penalty for the slightest breach of silence. All night long they must stand about, hungry and dumb. The result of all this is that these slaves, who may not talk in their master's presence, talk about their master. But the slaves in former days, who were permitted to converse not only in their master's presence, but actually with him, whose mouths were not stitched up tight, were ready to bare their necks for their master, to bring upon their own heads any danger that threatened him. They spoke at the feast, but kept silent during torture. Finally, the saying in allusion to this same high-handed treatment becomes current: "As many enemies as you have slaves." They are not the enemies when we acquire them. We make them enemies.
So what is Epictetus talking about when he says everything has two handles by which it may be borne? So I guess you can think of humanity like an earthenware cup with two handles. One that you should hold it with and one you should not. He compares then his brother to this earthenware vessel, a brother who has done him harm or done you harm, and you need to approach this problem. How should you pick it up? How should you handle the situation? Well, there's two ways to handle it: the right way and the wrong way. One way is to storm in there, thinking about what your brother did to you that really made you mad, and to tell him off, curse at him, escalate the situation, and do what feels good, but probably will result in the end in a much worse situation. The other way to handle this is to approach it and handle it the other way. Remember that this is your brother. You share a common background. You love your brother. And approach the situation from this angle. Yes, they may have done you some kind of wrong, but they probably did it out of ignorance rather than out of anger or hate. And even if they did do it out of anger and hate, you can probably work through it if you approach it with a calm and cool head. We can expand this circle of brotherhood from our literal siblings to humanity in general. We can approach people based on what they have done that makes us mad, or we can approach people remembering that they are our brothers and sisters, and we all share common humanity. We all share the same emotions. We share a common plight, and we should approach others from that angle with compassion. Marcus Aurelius also kind of goes down this road where he talks about making sure that he is remembered as someone who did no man harm in act or in word, essentially. So he spoke well of others, and he did well by others, including his family and his slaves. How well do you treat those around you? How well do you treat those that are the least well off around you? Thankfully, we don't have slaves now. But remember, this is a Roman emperor, the top of the Roman food chain, talking about treating slaves, which are near the bottom or at the bottom of the Roman chain of the hierarchy here, treating them with respect. Put that into modern context. Think of service workers or the homeless. How well did you tip the waiter today at the restaurant you ate at, or were you cheap? How kind were you to the cashier at the grocery store? Did you walk right past that homeless person today, or did you approach him and think of him as your brother and look to see if there was anything you could do to actually help that individual? These are those things we wrestle with, as I said, as we're adopting a life philosophy. Rather than just saying, oh, what a lazy bum, you might say, oh, this person's hit hard times. I can see myself in their shoes. We come from the same town. We come from the same state. We live on the same planet. We are brothers, and I should try to help this person out. Marcus Aurelius also talks about all the great things he's seen and all the honors and pains he's despised, meaning that he was indifferent to. Because if you go back to the last episode on control, remember, things that people do to you, whether they hate you or love you or praise you, those are out of your control, so you should be indifferent to them. You might prefer to be loved than hated, but ultimately it's indifferent to you. But then he also ends reminding himself to be good to those around him, even if they're super annoying and you find it hard to get along with them. Remember, they are your relation, whether they are countrymen or kin. You have to find that common thread and try to approach them from that angle. Lastly, Seneca, always the wordiest of the two, at least in the way I select the readings. He talks to Lucilius about how Lucilius is well known for dining with his slaves, which apparently had fallen out of fashion. According to Seneca, slaves were once treated more as not equals, but close to peers of the master. They would engage with him in conversation, but apparently it was becoming more and more common to whip them and keep them silent while the master gorged on food with his friends around the table. What's going to happen when you treat people this way? Instead of them respecting you, they are going to hate you. And we see Seneca obviously advocating that this is not the way to treat those under your command. So once again, we're fortunate enough to not have slavery in this nation anymore. But apply this to those around you, your coworkers. Once again, the service workers around you. Always ask yourself, are you behaving wisely? Using your knowledge of Stoicism, using your knowledge of right and wrong in any given situation? If Seneca heard about what you did today, how you treated those around you today, would he write you a letter of praise or a letter of scorn? Carpe diem.